The military junta in Guinea is preparing to hold a referendum on a draft constitution that has the country divided. 6.7 million Guineans are eligible to cast votes. In fact, support.
Brothers and sisters of Africa, friends across the world, welcome once again to Voice of Africa, the platform where the light of our continent shines and the truth of our history and present is told without fear or favor. Today, we turn our attention to Guinea, a West African nation standing at a decisive crossroads. On September 21, 2025, the Guinean people will head to the polls for a constitutional referendum that has already stirred intense debate both inside the country and beyond. This referendum is not just about rewriting legal documents. It is about shaping the nation's future, defining its democratic path, and determining whether the leader of a military coup can transform himself into a legitimate president through the ballot box. To understand why this moment is so important, we must step back and look at the journey Guinea has traveled in the past 4 years. In September 2021, Colonel Mamady Doumbouya, then commander of the Special Forces, stormed the presidential palace and deposed President Alpha Condé. The justification was familiar to Africans who have witnessed coups across the region. Condé, they said, had betrayed democracy, clung to power through controversial constitutional changes, and presided over corruption and instability. Doumbouya promised to refound the state, restore order, and prepare Guinea for a return to civilian governance. To reassure the people and the international community, a transition charter was adopted, and among its central points was a clear prohibition. No junta leader or member of the military government could participate in future elections. This clause was meant to guarantee that the men in uniform who seized power would eventually step aside for civilians. The initial transition plan included deadlines. Elections were supposed to take place by December 2024, a time frame that many believed would be challenging but possible. Yet, as months passed, deadlines slipped. Political parties found themselves sidelined, opposition figures were silenced or exiled, and civil society began to question whether the transition was genuine. By the end of 2024, elections had not been held, and Guinea remained under military control. It is in this climate of uncertainty that the new constitutional draft emerged, a draft that would remove the restrictions preventing junta members from running for office. This is the heart of the controversy. If the Constitution passes, Doumbouya himself will be eligible to stand in the December 2025 elections. The new rules also extend the presidential term from 5 years to 7, renewable once, meaning a president could remain in power for up to 14 years. In addition, the draft establishes a Senate in which 1/3 of members would be appointed directly by the president, while the rest would come from regional and municipal councils. To its supporters, these provisions provide a stronger structure for governance. To its critics, they are instruments designed to entrench power in the hands of the man who came to office through a coup. Over 6.7 million Guineans are registered to vote in this referendum. For it to be considered valid, participation must reach a threshold, and the outcome will be determined by a simple majority. On the surface, this looks like democracy at work, but the reality on the ground is far more complex. Opposition parties, such as the Union of Democratic Forces of Guinea, led by longtime opposition figure Chello Dalein Diallo, remain suspended. The party of the ousted Alpha Condé is also sidelined, with major opposition players excluded, with restrictions on media, and with reports of harassment and disappearances of activists. Many question whether this referendum is happening on a level playing field. Supporters of the draft argue that Guinea cannot afford to remain in political limbo. They say the referendum is a step forward, offering a constitutional framework to replace the uncertainty of military decrees. For civil servants and some ordinary citizens, the yes vote symbolizes order and the possibility of finally normalizing governance. On social media, some Guineans have proudly displayed the word "we" on their profile pictures, seeing the referendum as a necessary stage in the transition. They argue that regardless of who runs in the coming election, the country needs rules, institutions, and a clear timetable. But critics see things differently. For them, the referendum is a masquerade, a carefully crafted maneuver to legitimize Doumbouya's hold on power. They point to the suspension of opposition parties, the silencing of independent media, and the absence of open debate as evidence that the outcome is already predetermined. Exiled opposition leaders have called for a boycott, urging citizens not to validate what they describe as an illegal power grab. In neighborhoods of Conakry and in regions that traditionally oppose the military, residents openly say they will not vote, convinced that their voices will not matter in a process that is neither free nor fair. International organizations are also watching closely. Human Rights Watch has accused the Guinean government of enforced disappearances and arbitrary suspensions of media outlets. Amnesty International and others have raised alarms about the shrinking civic space and the risks of violent repression if protests erupt. The international community, including ECOWAS and the African Union, has called for inclusive and transparent processes. Yet Guinea's vast mineral wealth, especially in bauxite, the key ingredient in aluminum and iron ore, ensures that powerful foreign investors remain engaged, sometimes softening the criticism from governments abroad. The delicate balance between human rights concerns and economic interests complicates the international response. The stakes of this referendum extend beyond Guinea's borders. In recent years, West Africa has experienced a wave of coups. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and each has followed a similar script. Leaders justify their seizures of power by pointing to corruption or insecurity. They promise a transition, and then they maneuver to remain in control, often through constitutional changes or delayed elections. Guinea's referendum fits neatly into this pattern. The outcome could therefore influence not only Guinean politics but also the wider regional dynamic, signaling whether military takeovers can be normalized and institutionalized through the ballot box. For ordinary Guineans, however, the concerns are not abstract theories of governance. They are daily struggles: the cost of living, unemployment, access to basic services, education for their children, health care for their families. Many ask themselves whether a yes or no vote will truly change these realities. If Doumbouya remains, will his government deliver on promises of development and stability, or will Guinea slip into a prolonged period of authoritarian rule with limited accountability? If the constitution is rejected, will the military respect the result, or will the country plunge into another cycle of uncertainty and repression? These are the questions weighing on the minds of millions. As the day of the referendum approaches, the risk of unrest looms. Boycotts may lead to low turnout, undermining legitimacy. Protests could erupt, especially in opposition strongholds, and the government's response could be harsh. Already, Guinea has a history of deadly crackdowns on demonstrators. A repeat of such violence would further deepen divisions and weaken the credibility of any constitutional process. On the other hand, if turnout is high and the vote appears peaceful, the government will claim legitimacy, even if critics continue to challenge the fairness of the context. What does this mean for Africa and for Pan-African aspirations? It is a reminder that the continent's struggle for democracy is far from over. While some nations make strides in institutional reforms and peaceful transfers of power, others wrestle with cycles of coups, constitutions rewritten to suit leaders, and citizens forced to choose between stability and freedom. Guinea's story is not unique, but it is emblematic of the challenges many African countries face. As Africans, it is our duty to watch closely, to demand accountability, and to amplify the voices of ordinary people who want dignity, justice, and opportunity. Whether one supports or opposes the referendum, the ultimate test will not be the words written in the new constitution, but the lived reality of Guineans in the years ahead. Will the promises of reform translate into schools built, hospitals equipped, jobs created, and rights protected? Or will they remain empty slogans while power is consolidated in fewer hands? At Voice of Africa, we believe in telling these stories with clarity and balance. Guinea stands at a fork in the road. One path may lead to long-term consolidation of power under a former coup leader, dressed in democratic clothing. Another path may lead to uncertainty, but perhaps also to genuine debate and eventual renewal. Whatever the outcome, history will remember this moment as one where the people of Guinea were asked to decide not only on the text of a constitution, but on the future of their nation. As the sun rises over Conakry on referendum day, millions will line up to cast their votes, some with hope, others with resignation, many with skepticism. The world will watch, but more importantly, the people of Guinea will write the next chapter of their story. And for us across Africa, their struggle is a reflection of our own. A reminder that democracy must be defended, that constitutions must serve the people, and that power, no matter how it comes to be, must ultimately be accountable to those it governs.